Okay, so
Okay, yeah.
yeah, so it's recording now. First off, I want to say thank you so much for doing this. I appreciate your time. I'm excited to hear the answers to the questions. So thanks for coming on today.
It's my pleasure.
So what do you want me to call you Royal then?
Yeah, Royal is fine.
It's a
I
little
mean,
bit
I guess,
yeah,
yeah,
no,
it's a little confusing.
yeah, no, it's fine. You can call me Bill. That's my name. So that way there's no confusion as to who we're talking to or anything. So I'll call you Royal, and if you want to call me Bill, that's fine.
Okay.
So I think to start out, the first thing people probably want to know is tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, maybe where you grew up, relevant jobs, or just anything you think people might be interested to know.
Okay, so I'm Royal. That's my online name. My real life name is Marios. I'm Greek. I grew up in Greece. However, when I was 10, I moved to the United States for a few years, then back to Greece. I lived in Belgium for a year. And after I finished high school, I decided to go study in London. Then I studied in Brussels and I finished my degree in Brussels. Currently, I'm in Canada. I work in consulting and I'm a big gamer. Obviously, I've played professional gaming in Wild Rift, but I've also played a bit in League of Legends. And yeah, that's about it. That's the background.
No, that's cool. Did you play like semi-pro or pro in League of Legends too?
Yeah, I played just a bit, maybe like one season in the Greek League. It wasn't anything major. I mostly streamed, made some content when I played League of Legends. And when Wild Rift came out, I transitioned more into a pro role.
Okay. Can you talk a little bit more about what it was like maybe to be a pro or, what you went through to become a pro in Wild Rift?
Yeah. So Wild Rift was a fairly new game. I started playing it the moment it came out, I think in 2020. However, I didn't find much interest in it, and I was still playing League of Legends at the time. So I didn't initially get on board with Wild Rift, even though the game seemed very good. But after I quit League of Legends, and I kind of wanted to find a new game because I was kind of bored of League of Legends, I decided to hop on Wild Rift. So it was like 4 or 5 months after it came out. So while most pro players have been playing the game for 5 months, I need to catch up a little bit.
Geez.
Yeah, so as I was climbing the ladder, trying to get used to the differences, because while League of Legends and Wild Rift are very similar, they still have a lot of differences. So I was trying to figure that stuff out. And slowly I got to Challenger after a couple of months maybe, which is the highest tier you can get to. And that's when I kind of made like a looking for team post on my Twitter where I already had quite a few followers. And that's how it was kind of found from the Wild Rift community. And they were super excited to have more high elo League of Legends players transitioning, since most of the players in Wild Rift come from other MOBAs, other mobile MOBAs. So they come from like Arena of Valor or Vainglory. So a lot of teams were actually excited to have like a League of Legends player in their team. So I immediately got a lot of tryout offers. Um, so Ryu was actually the one who helped me the most throughout this process, and Doom. Ryu kind of helped me understand like the landscape of the competitive scene, what teams are really good, what teams aren't that good, what the tournaments look like, and actually ended up playing for his team, which was Team Singularity at the time. That was my introduction to it.
Okay.
So that was the way I kind of got into the Wild Rift Pro scene.
What does a tryout look like? And how like I can't get a tryout if I ask or just make a post, but like how do people get them and then what are they?
Yeah, so the first thing you need to do is you need to convince the team to give you a tryout, right? Or if you're very good, they need to convince you to try out for them. So obviously being higher rank in the solo queue ladder, that's the easiest way to get one if you're like at the top tier ranks, but sometimes that's not enough, right? Maybe having a player vouch for you, maybe playing with them in solo queue and seeing, oh wait, that guy's really good, I want him in my team. So there's many ways to get a tryout. You pretty much have to prove to people that you're skillful, and that comes from networking as well as playing very good wherever you can, obviously. So I was kind of lucky because I had a background in competitive play. So teams were more excited to give me tryouts. So the way a tryout would go, it's kind of like a scrimmage session, right? You play versus another team in a game that doesn't really matter, just a practice game. And obviously for you it matters because you're trying out. So you're just trying to prove your skill. But it's not just trying out the team deciding if you're good or not. It's also deciding if you're a good fit for the team. Personality-wise, if you're talkative and they need like a shot caller, they need someone to talk more, you mess with them chemistry-wise. So there's a lot of factors that go into the trial. They're not just judging your skill.
Right, right. How, so can I ask, were you a shot caller when you like going in for the trial? Are you just calling shots with this team you haven't played with?
I'm definitely more of a talkative player in game. I hate having silence. I want to constantly be talking about the next step in the game, what we need to be doing. So while I wouldn't call myself a shot caller, I definitely talk a lot. I give a lot of information that I think will be useful. And I think that's what the team really needed at the time, the first team I joined, because they have a lot of chemistry issues with their previous mid laner. So when I replaced him, it was kind of like a breath for fresh air. However, I was still getting used to the game. I had only been playing it for 2 months while they've been playing it since release. So they also had to kind of get me up to speed with how competitive works in Wild Rift.
Right, right. Are you saying like mechanics or champions or what?
Yeah, I was already familiar with the champions and the mechanics of the game because they're similar to League of Legends. I mostly had to get familiar with the macro of things because the map is so much smaller in Wild Rift compared to League of Legends. I had to adapt in rotations, how to adapt my macro to kind of understand how Wild Rift works more. It was definitely a bit of a getting used to stage. My teammates probably hated me for the first couple of weeks because I was playing awful,
Right.
but I definitely caught up to them quite quickly after that.
What let's say somebody's watching this and they're coming from League and they're maybe just starting out or newer with Wild Rift. What's maybe one or two tips that you would give them so they can make a smoother transition?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on your goals, right? If you want to become a professional player, or if you just want to enjoy the game and just get better at the game and climb to high ranks in solo queue. But the main thing I would say is this is a very fast-paced game compared to League of Legends. So you always need to be maximizing your time efficiency. You don't want to be sitting around and you want to be progressing throughout the game a lot faster. That'll be my main tip.
Okay, cool. I personally have never played League of Legends, so I don't really know the difference, but that's interesting that it's a little bit slower. It looks slower on the videos when I watch them. Um, Now I know the pro scene is sort of, I don't want to say falling apart, but could you maybe talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So the Wild Rift scene has not fallen apart everywhere. It has fallen apart in the West. So China still has a very, very strong pro scene for Wild Rift. China, Southeast Asia, I think Korea as well. However, in the West, due to the lack of viewership, mobile games that aren't that popular, I think only Brazil really had a lot of viewership for Wild Rift. Riot has kind of stepped back and decided that, okay, we're going to allocate a prize pool for third-party tournaments, but we're not going to directly host the tournaments and pull resources into it. And it's really a shame because I believe that Wild Rift could have been the first mobile game to be extremely successful in the West. I think the only one that's somewhat successful is Mobile Legends, or the first mobile game that is MOBA, right? There's many mobile games that are successful.
Right, right.
So yeah, I definitely thought Wild Rift had the gameplay and the viewer experience to become the best. However, I felt that the Riot's lack of marketing and community engagement, even though they made a perfect game, they kind of failed to transition that to a more living pro scene. And it also has the problem of, oh, why would I watch Wild Rift when I can watch League of Legends, right? Because they're very similar in a sense. The other problem that Wild Rift had is that, again, going back to the marketing, it's not just advertising it to people who don't play Wild Rift. Even players who played Wild Rift they weren't really aware that there were tournaments going on. They weren't really aware that there was a pro scene going on. So after Riot's initial failure to kind of make it successful in year one, they decided to step back and let third-party organizers do their thing. So we still have tournaments going on. However, they're definitely a smaller scale than what we had on the first year of Wild Rift.
Do you still play in those tournaments? Like, are you still on a team?
So I've decided to take a step back and not really play on these upcoming tournaments. However, I've done a little bit of coaching for some of the teams to kind of help them get adjusted. But yeah, that's about it. My last tournament was a few months ago, I think in November.
Okay. Can I ask, like, what's the prize pool on these tournaments, or how does that work?
Yeah, so I think that Wild Rift for the season, right, announced the 35,000 Euro prize pool for Europe. We don't really know about America yet, but it used to be higher last year with all the tournaments going on. It's still a decent prize pool. Unfortunately, it's not enough for most players to make a living, right? Because 35,000 spread across so many players, so many teams. Even at the top, you're probably not making your full-time job, right? Even though last year we had quite a few teams. I think there were 3 or 4 teams in NA and 4 or 5 teams in Europe that were actually able to full-time Wild Rift. But I don't think that the salaries from the orgs are like big enough for them to make it worth it. So it's a decent prize pool for the fun of it. Like it's definitely worth participating, but it's not worth to dedicate your entire time to it.
Right, right. I mean, because even if you win first prize, you got to split it with 4 other people, a coach, right?
Coach. Yeah.
And maybe some other people that are sponsoring the teams or whoever it is. Do players ever get like sponsorship deals or anything like that, like a professional athlete might?
Yeah, so I don't think in Wild Rift we're really able to get sponsorship deals individually as players because the game just wasn't big enough yet. I know in other games that's the case. I know in League of Legends there's many players who get sponsorship deals just by themselves without their team. But the most common thing is the team gets a sponsor deal, you get paid from your team, and you contribute to that sponsor deal through content, through whatever else, right? So it's mostly the organizations that get the sponsorships and you play for the organization. So that's the usual system.
Gotcha. That's interesting. Yeah, I guess that makes sense, until it gets a little bit bigger. Um, to change gears a little bit, what what maybe do you perceive or what do you think is, either the biggest or maybe a couple of the biggest issues that Wild Rift has?
So Wild Rift as a game, I think is very well made. The gameplay of it is really good. The main problem that it has is its matchmaking. I think that the matchmaking is mostly focused more towards casual gaming, and that kind of creates a separation of players because a lot of players are try-harding a lot, they're trying to get to a higher rank, and then there's players who just want to have fun. And when you match those players together is where a lot of conflict gets created. So I think the matchmaking definitely hasn't done a great job at separating those two groups, and that kind of creates a lot of conflict. And I would say, obviously, esports, as we talked about, is the second biggest problem. But yeah, I would say the lack of a solid matchmaking system is the main problem that Wild Rift is facing.
Do you think the matchmaking is a function of how many or how few players there are? Because, if there's only, let's say in one region might have 500 real good players like yourself. You guys aren't playing all the time, and so in order for you to get matches, you're going to have to play with, plebs like me.
I definitely do think that it's also an issue of lack of player base, but there has to be a fine balance between finding games, but still having those games be very competitive. So I'm not sure how many players you need to allow in those top ranks to get that balance. However, I know that right now we don't have that balance, and a lot of players are being led into these top ranks, leading to low quality games, which cause a lot of frustration, a lot of anxiety for these players from both of them, right? Like the good players are getting frustrated, the bad players are kind of having anxiety of not performing well in those games. So I definitely think that there has to be a fine line, which is hard to find. I do think Wild Rift has enough good players at this point to make a better matchmaking for those higher levels, but also the lower levels.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm not sure because I'm rated relatively high in NA right now. I think I hit 1800th in the server, and quite frankly, I think I could get into a game with somebody of your caliber, and I don't feel like I should be in that game, but I don't know what they do because somehow I made it that high, you know?
I mean, that's also where those are the games that you're going to improve the most in as well when you see what those better players do.
Right.
So I'm not saying that obviously we should just exclude everyone. Like, yeah, players need to slowly be getting into those games so they can improve as well. But it's also like in the very low ranks. Like, I'm pretty sure there's no players in Iron. I think it's like 1 or 2% of the player base. Like, there's more Grandmaster players than Iron players at the moment. It's only bots in like Iron, Bronze So they've just kind of inflated the rank distribution to be very high instead of like having it be a pyramid, right? It's an upside down pyramid at this point. There's too
Right.
few players in the low ranks, too many players in the high ranks.
I was trying to get as much data as possible on that. It's very hard to figure out exactly what it is, but I've been asking people to send screenshots of their accounts to see like when they're Diamond 1, what percentage of players they fall in. So I wish they would give us a little more data on that, but unfortunately, that's sort of what it is. Um, to switch gears a little bit to what are your feelings on the toxicity in games? Talk about that a little bit.
I mean, I come from League of Legends, right? Which is, it might be the most toxic game that there is. A lot of people just typing and typing. And I used to be somewhat toxic when I was younger and I play a lot of League of Legends. But as I grew older, I realized that, being toxic is not cool. Like, yeah, you have the anonymity aspect that kind of protects you and can kind of say what you want. But once you realize that you're playing with other humans, you're playing with other people, being unnecessarily toxic isn't really something that I want to do. And I think the main tipping point for me is when I actually swapped to Wild Rift. And I'm like, okay, this is a game where it's mostly younger audiences as well. So I definitely need to be careful with what I type because I don't want to give the wrong type of influence to the younger audience. And at the same time, um, I think just getting older, you realize that being toxic is just not the cool thing to do. It's not the edgy thing to do, right? It's actually like kind of cringe. So I
Right.
definitely think that Wild Rift suffers from a toxicity problem, which I find really weird because honestly, I cannot be bothered to open the chat and type on my little like phone. With a keyboard, it's a lot easier. So I can't be bothered to type, but I still find a lot of players who find the time to type in games and be very toxic.
Right, right. I think I heard at some point, maybe it was League of Legends, they were removing the chat or doing something to that effect. Did you
Yeah.
hear anything about that?
So they had plans to remove all chat. I don't think they actually did it. I don't think they went through with it. But I know in the Wild Rift they've removed all chat, so you can communicate with the enemy team.
Oh, okay. Maybe
They
maybe
combat
that's
toxicity.
yeah,
Yeah.
maybe that's what it is. Because I the thing that I'm not pro level or caliber, but the thing that ruins games for me, and one of the things that I want to sort of affect with my channel is to reduce. I'd love to eliminate the toxicity in games because for somebody who's not great at the game, like I don't think I'm pro level, to the thing that ruins games for me is when players are toxic or they don't try. Like I can relate to a bad play because I make them all the time. And so I don't mind if you make a bad play, but if somebody makes a bad play and then, they run it down or they go AFK, that's one of the things that I want to push or would like to get across to people that if we remove toxicity from the games would be better. Like I think it would just overall make the game a better game.
Yeah, definitely. What you said, it's not just flaming, it's not just using bad words, it's also your behavior in game. Like in Wild Rift, the worst feeling is when your teams intentionally ruin your game by just giving your laner a free kill, by stealing your resources. If you're playing jungle and your laners just come and take your jungle camps on purpose to set you behind. That type of behavior is what it is frustrating, right? And that's what also causes the verbal flame most often.
Right.
So it's kind of hard to balance that and figure out how to stop that.
Yeah, and I don't know how Riot does it because obviously, they're aware of it, they must be, but whatever it is they're trying just doesn't seem to work. And so, I hope that people would just really consider that part of it, that it doesn't help the game, it makes it worse. And when one person is toxic, you can easily turn another person, and then all of a sudden then you have an entire team of toxic players, and the game's over and everybody's mad as where if everybody just kept trying, like the sweatiest games and the best games are comeback games for me, where somebody does make a bad play, but then the team rallies around that guy and you come back and win. So hopefully people start thinking about that more, and especially hearing somebody like you. I mean, being a professional player, you have your own channel. Hopefully, if they hear your perspective, they'll start just at least considering to tone down the toxicity.
I also
Um,
think the main issue with toxicity is that we don't see the other players in our team as like humans. We just see them as pixels on the screen, right? Like, can you imagine going like a pickup game for basketball just with random people, which I do sometimes because I like basketball. and just like talking shit to them to like my teammates, like, oh, what a bad pass.
Right.
Like I can't even imagine doing that, right? Like people IRL are nice. But
Right.
once you put that anonymity and you forget that these are humans you're interacting with, it's very easy to be very toxic. So I
Yeah.
think Riot can kind of combat that somehow.
Right. And I played hockey growing up, and if you go to a hockey pickup game and you said something that people say in the chat, like you get knocked out in hockey. Like that's how it works. Like there's no everybody's pretty much friendly, and if somebody freaks out, like there's a fight, and that's how it goes. So yeah, I can totally relate to what you're saying, that if we saw each other, we would never do that. Like I'm never gonna say something terrible to you. I can see your face right now. So I agree with that. So I don't want to take up too much of your time, but is there anything else that maybe you want to say, something you want to add? Hopefully people, I'm sure they know that you have a channel, but maybe you want to talk about your channel a little bit, or just really, I want to leave it sort of open to you to say anything you want.
Well, shout out my channel since you gave me the chance. If you guys want Wild Rift content, I'm a positive guy doing educational content mostly, toxicity free. The other thing I would like to add is I would really like to chat in Wild Rift. I don't know if you know this, but in the Chinese server, they actually have voice chat, not just for teammates, but for anyone that you're playing with. I feel like that would be a good way to kind of humanize your teammates, and I think it would lead to less toxicity, but I can also see the problems that voice chat would cause.
Right, right. Yeah, I mean, I would like voice chat. I think they have a beta actually in NA, but it doesn't allow me to click it yet. I can see a speaker and I click it and then it gives me an error. So maybe they're starting to kick that around.
I think that's only for people you're in a party with, though. So, like, people you're
Oh,
pre-made with.
maybe that's why it doesn't, because I have tried it in solo queue and it doesn't work. So that's
Yeah.
probably right. Um, Anything else you want to say before we wrap up?
No, I think that's about it.
Okay, great. Royal, thank you so much for doing this. I appreciate your time. I appreciate your videos, content, and all that. So thank you so much for coming on today. And hopefully I see you on the Rift. GG.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. See ya.
Okay, I'm gonna